Hello, Gene Schwimmer here. Welcome to today's vlog and our subject, which will actually be two subjects rolled into one, and the inauguration of a new feature that I will be featuring periodically because, well, if it's a feature, then you feature it, right? That's why it's called a feature. So periodically, a new feature, which I am going to call Democrats' Impeachment Spin Cycle Update. And what this will be is, well, what is a spin cycle? Let's talk about a spin cycle first. And a spin cycle, I'm actually talking about spin. Where does this originate? It originates in, well, it was a listserv. Do you remember listservs? I wonder, I assume they still have them. I don't know. I never used a listserv myself. But it's a way for a group of people to form some kind of a group where they communicate with each other, but privately. This one was called Jornalist, not journalist, but Journalist with an O instead of an A. It was started by Ezra Klein, who is now the editor and the founder of a website called Vox, a liberal website, Vox, V-O-X. What was Journalist? What it was a listserv of journalists, of reporters for various publications such as the Washington Post, New York Times, so on and so forth. One would assume it to be just a way for journalists just to let their hair down and communicate with each other and just talk shop. But what it actually turned out to be was a way for liberal journalists, because it was a members only. You had to be invited or given permission to join the journalist listserv. It wasn't open to all journalists. It was only liberal journalists. And there was a big scandal about journalists, which is why it no longer exists. The scandal was that the reporters who were communicating on journalists, they weren't just talking shop, they were coordinating their messages. A journalist or a group of them would come up with a talking point of the day, and then they would all repeat it. So there would be a certain talking point that one reporter would bring up, he would suggest it to the others, and then it would appear in every mainstream media publication. Now, the reason I bring that up is because well, you may have seen some of these. You can go on YouTube and see, well, you know who's good at this is Tucker Carlson. He's done at least a couple of these and probably more, where he will just have a montage, a video of a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, just showing journalist after journalist after journalist, or talking head, television talking head after talking head after talking head, saying exactly the same thing. And it would be obvious that these reporters are coordinating, that the Democrats come up with a meme of the day, a subject of the day, a talking point of the day, and then all liberal journalists just simply repeat it. Now, I want to do periodic updates on the latest spin, or I just call it the spin cycle because it goes in cycles. They'll spin one thing, then another, then another, then another. I'm starting to notice these myself, and one I just noticed today. It started with President Zelensky of the Ukraine. He was talking to reporters. He said once again that there was no quid pro quo. He felt no pressure from the Trump administration, from Donald Trump, to do anything in order to get some aid released. After that interview, I heard several throughout the day as I've been working on my little computer in my little office, saying over and over again, well, Zelensky had to say that. He didn't really mean it. He wasn't telling the truth. He had to say that because Ukraine depends on the United States for military aid. So, of course, he has to say whatever Trump wants him to say. He has to say there is no quid pro quo in order to get the aid. And one pundit, one commentator after another, Democratic commentator after another throughout the day, at least 3 or 4, said that same thing over and over again. It's what, well, they're in a panic, I think, because the Horowitz IG report is coming out soon, and then you're going to have Durham, and that may lead to indictments. They're starting to panic, and what they are doing, and what I mean by spin, is they're trying to get ahead of these reports and spin the interpretation so that people will not, well, so to name a big one, they're trying to discredit William Barr, the Attorney General, so that whatever he says, people will take with a grain of salt and say, well, he's biased, he didn't really find anything, so on and so forth. I don't know how they're going to manage that with Durham, who has a sterling reputation. He's been working quietly, off in Connecticut, not in Washington. So that's going to be interesting to see. But getting back to Zelensky, we have Gerald Nadler and his Judiciary Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, will start holding hearings Wednesday this week. He's going to have before the committee testifying constitutional scholars to advise on impeachment. What is impeachment? What are the requirements for impeachment? What's interesting about that, as a little bit of an aside, is that there will be 4 witnesses, 3 of them chosen by the Democrats, by Nadler, to argue for impeachment, and only 1 allowed to speak on the other side against impeachment. In other words, the Democrats get to pick 3 scholars to testify, the Republicans only 1. And remember also that anybody that the Republicans choose must be approved by Gerald Nadler. He has the right to refuse whoever they choose. So keep that in mind. Now we come to the big question, the question that I believe these Democrats need to answer. These Democrats who are saying that there was a quid pro quo, but Zelensky is saying that there was no quid pro quo, must say that there was no quid pro quo because of his and Ukraine's dependence on the United States of America and on Donald Trump for aid. The question is simply this. Assume, and I know this will be hard for some of our Democratic friends, but just for the sake of argument, assume that there was no quid pro quo. Okay? Just assume, for the sake of argument, that there was no quid pro quo. Assume further that Zelensky is asked, as he was, whether there was a quid pro quo. The question is this: how should Zelensky answer? What should his answer be? If he is asked if there was a quid pro quo and there was no quid pro quo, then how should he answer? Obviously, to me, and I would think to anybody, if there was no quid pro quo, he would simply say there was no quid pro quo. So do you see how absurd this latest spin is? And that's one of the interesting things, if I can make another quick aside, is how increasingly absurd their spin is getting as this impeachment circus goes on. Because, well, there's no way to answer that question. If there's no quid pro quo, he's going to say there's no quid pro quo, and the Democrats are saying, well, he's saying there's no quid pro quo because there was a quid pro quo, and he has to say that. Do you see how they are trying to make it irrelevant whatever Zelensky says? That, well, you make your own judgment. I'm not going to characterize it. I'm just going to leave it there. You make your own judgment. If you want to share your judgment with other people, there's a comment section below the video where you can make your comments, and I welcome your comments. But before you do that, before you make your comments, thumbs up if you like this video. Share it with anybody you think would also like the video. If you would subscribe, I would love to get a subscriber or 2 or 3 or 4 or as many as I can get. And finally, come back and see me again, because I would love to see all of you again, and bring a few friends and relatives and whoever you can drag off the street along with you. They may resist at first, but once they listen to my vlog, I guarantee they will thank you for it. And until next time, bye.